Shenzhou 12 reporting, we've made it into the Tianhe core module, our home in space.
3 astronauts are now safely aboard the Chinese space station. They're home for the next 3 months. We will take a look at China's space program. Hello, I'm Arnold Naidu, and this is The Heat. China successfully launches the first crewed mission into space since 2016. 3 men will carry out experiments and build their new space station on a mission which will include 2 spacewalks. CGTN's Ning reports on the launch and what's next for the country's space program.
3 veteran Chinese astronauts, Nie Haisheng, Liu Boming, and Tang Hongbo, are the first to travel to the core module of China's space station, the Tianhe. Greeted by local citizens, space engineers, and press from around the world, they set out from Wentiange, where they're staying before the launch, to start a 3-month journey to space. The last manned launch by China took place nearly 5 years ago. Since then, there have been more than 70 improvements and adjustments to the rocket alone.
The Shenzhou 12-man spaceship has carried 3 astronauts, now is heading to their new home in the sky. And this also marks the beginning of a new era where China will have its own space station, and there will be more Chinese astronauts set out from here in the future.
573 seconds after liftoff, the mission was announced to be a complete success.
I was quite nervous but also excited, watching the rocket fly on schedule as planned, and following the track as we designed it. I feel relieved and happy. The rocket's performance is perfect today.
We will have 2 to 3 launches every year in the future. We will continue carrying forward the spirit of China's manned space projects and help to build the space station. Let it better serve the people in China and around the globe.
The achievements of China's space industry are made by these young space engineers. And rather than rest on their laurels, they will soon throw themselves into the Shenzhou 13 mission.
Engineers and scientists are now celebrating the success of the Shenzhou 12-man spaceship, and what awaits them is more tough tasks in the future. But at this moment is a moment of celebration and success. Ning Hong, CGTN, Zhouquan.
To talk more about the Chinese space program, let's meet our panel from Beijing via Skype. Yang Yuguang is a professor at China Aerospace Science and Industry Corporation. From Providence, Rhode Island, James Head is a professor of Geological Sciences at Brown University and a veteran of NASA's Apollo program. Here in Washington, D.C., Keith Cowing is the editor at NASAWatch.com and a former rocket scientist. And Amitabha Ghosh is a space scientist working on NASA's Mars missions. He's also here with us in Washington, D.C. Welcome to all of you. And Yang Yuguang, let me start with you. This is the 3rd mission to build the Chinese station, but the first manned one. So what can you tell us about the significance of this particular mission?
Well, this Shenzhou 12 mission is not only a pure crew transportation mission to the station, but also, that is very critical for the technology demonstration and the verification. You know that we've already mastered most of the technology during the former missions, such as the rendezvous and the docking, EVA, and the crew transportation. But still, there are many technologies to verify. For instance, the largest or the longest duration record before is 1 month in Shenzhou 11 mission. But this time, we will have a long-term duration in space. So we must test that. And also, to saving the resources, we must master the regenerative life support system. The sweat, urine, condensation water, and others we must recycle all these resources. So we must test this technology. And of course, the EVA, we only tested 20 minutes in 2008 in Shenzhou 7 mission. But this time, we will work longer. 2 astronauts will perform 2 EVAs in space, and it will be lasting several hours to test if in the future we can master this and do the scientific research outside the station. And together with the remote control, manual docking of the cargo ship, and so on. So you can see so many technologies we still need to test. And this Shenzhou 12 and together with the Shenzhou 13 will be in this phase to testing these technologies. Only after this we can construct the station formally.
Amitabha Ghosh, China is planning 8 more missions, and that will complete the construction of the space station by the end of next year. So what can we expect over the next 2 years? What should we be looking out for?
So I think you will be looking at multiple flights as as more and more astronauts are swapped in and out, more and more components are added and consolidated. At the end of 2022, you will probably have a fully functional space station which can last for a few years.
And from what I understand, Amitabh, the 3 astronauts that went up now, they will be rotated every 3 months.
Right. So that's why, I mean, separate crews will be sent in, and different crews will man it, and so ultimately you will have a 365-day crew, some crew always there at the space station constantly for the next few years.
Keith Cowing, the International Space Station, which has been in orbit for quite some time now, is larger than the one that the Chinese are planning right now. Despite the size difference, what are the other major differences between these 2 space stations, especially in what they're being built for?
Well, actually, both space stations are designed to do a variety of things, from human physiology to research and experiments. And I helped design the International Space Station back in the 90s. And looking inside of this spacecraft's modules, I see something very familiar. So it looks very much like the International Space Station. The ISS is much larger, as you said, and there's many more countries involved. But I do believe the space station can evolve over time. And I think what you'll be watching for is people who do research not just on one space station, but on both.
So, Keith, it took them about 6.5 hours to actually get up into orbit. They will be there for 3 months. What will they be doing during those 3 months?
Well, I'm pretty sure I know what they're doing right now, and it's a brand new space station. They're unpacking everything. They're making sure their job is like moving in. They're making sure that everything works, the basic systems work, the life support works. They'll have to go outside and install some things, and they'll be getting ready for the next crew and also for the next modules that arrive. So it's moving in. That's pretty much what they're doing.
Right, so they would have taken equipment up with them, including the panels that are used to build these things.
Yes, and the whole thing is things are packed here to get into orbit, and you have to unpack them and oftentimes install them and just turn them on and see if they work, and then try doing some of the initial experiments.
James Head, this space station, when it's complete, will consist of different modules. What will these modules be doing? What will they be built for?
Well, most of these modules are designed for support, but also for different scientific experiment modules. So with the space station and other kinds of earlier space stations, there might have been an astronomy module where they could do astronomical observations with big telescopes, et cetera. So they have multi-purposes, and of course, living quarters is critically important too. So they'll be doing a lot of different things, and so each module will go up. For example, the Japanese module on the International Space Station, et cetera, has specific experiments to design and to carry out. So it's very exciting from that point of view, because this is an additional way that more and different science can be done by scientific members of the international community.
So, James, the experiments that will be carried out will tell us more about life here on Earth and how that could be improved. But what about the effort for deep space exploration? What does a space station do to help that effort?
Oh, so many different things. If you're going to the moon, and the United States and Russia and ESA and China are absolutely planning to send humans to the moon, basically you're going to have to live there. So you want to learn how to grow vegetables, you want to learn how to do things and reduce gravity. There's all kinds of things you need to learn. Most importantly, though, are the technical aspects. As our initial speaker was saying, one has to accomplish a lot of different hurdles to be successful in space. For example, the Chinese Chang'e 5, the mission that just successfully returned samples from the moon robotically, went through every maneuver: orbit insertion, decoupling, landing, picking up samples, ascending, rendezvousing robotically, etc. All these things are going to have to be done by humans when they're in orbit and going down to the moon to land and explore. Chinese and American and European, Russians. So all of these technical things are really important. Plus, you want to know what it's like. It's like a training ground for astronauts going to the moon. We take our geologists out in the field on Earth, but you sort of have to do that in space before you end up going to the moon. So it's a great training ground for heading off to the moon and then on to Mars.
Yuguang, what kind of training did these 3 astronauts undergo to take on this mission?
Of course, they are well trained. We should notice that during the former missions before, usually we have one member which have the experience in real flight, but this time we have 2 members. So Mr. Nie Haisheng, who is the chief commander, also have the capability to perform a manual docking. He actually do it during the Shenzhou 10 mission, and also together with Mr. Liu Boming. You know that China's first EVA missions in Shenzhou 7, the Zhai Zhigang wears the China's Feitian spacesuit, and Mr. Liu Boming wears the Russian-made Orlan spacesuit, although he has not go out into the outer space, but he stayed in the orbital module like the airlock and also in the vacuum combination. So he is very experienced in this mission for the prepared EVA. And of course, they will train for the operation of the robotic arms. They will also use the robotic arm during the EVA. They were trained to operate all the instruments inside the station, for instance, such as the robotic arm and other things. Of course, they will train for the, as our guest has already mentioned, the experiments about the space medicine and also the space microgravity physics and so on. I should also emphasize that after the coming of the experimental modules, the Wentian or the experimental module 1 will have a main airlock, like the airlock in the Crest airlock in the ISS. And the second experimental module, the Mengtian, will also have a manned cargo airlock, like the airlock on the cable module of Japan. So you can see that the configurations are similar, have very similar functions, and the China space station, although it's much smaller, but will also have a very comprehensive configuration to perform this kind of scientific research.
Amitabha Ghosh, China, of course, is not part of the International Space Station. United States law, in fact, prohibits collaboration with China on the ISS. But we are seeing more collaboration right now and more cooperation between China and Russia. What is the significance of that? I mean, one would imagine that the technology that's available right now would be shared.
Right. So I don't think there is huge implications here. If you look at history, you'll find nations collaborate with different nations at different times, and it's very hard to predict who's going to partner with whom. So I'll give you an example. The first Indian mission to the moon, Chandrayaan, had the US as a partner. The subsequent missions, the Indians have not partnered with the US. UAE has partnered with the US. So I think people, it's kind of a musical chair, if you will, and nations choose collaborators based on the technical needs and perhaps the geopolitics as well at the moment. And but the biggest thing to take away here is each nation has its own strategic direction where they want to take their space program to, and they usually follow through with that.
Now, they may not be sharing living space on the International Space Station, Amitabha, but what about the core technologies that are used to send people up into space, to build these space stations? I mean, are those common to most countries that want to do it?
See, the physics and the engineering has to be the same. Usually, if one country contributes a certain module, then they build that, and I don't know whether technology is actually shared except for the interface. Things like science experiments. So if you recall, Norway, I think, has an experiment on this present space station, and where they're trying to grow cancer tumor cells, because apparently there are some genes which suppress the growth of tumors in space. So I would assume that this experiment was entirely developed in Norway, and the Chinese astronauts would just conduct the experiment as per instruction from the principal investigator, who's probably sitting in Norway.
Right. Now,
so yes.
On the question of international cooperation, CGTN's Julia Chapman interviewed a Russian cosmonaut who flew with US astronauts to the International Space Station. This is her report. Let's watch.
Valery Tokarev carried out 2 missions to space, but he never flew with another Russian cosmonaut. That experience has given him an international outlook.
When we enter space, there are no borders. There are no rivals like we're used to on Earth. Space is shared, and mastering it starts with international cooperation. Yes, we were representing different countries, but we were united by one common goal and common idea. And that translates onto Earth, and that existence of interpersonal relations increases the level of trust.
Tokarev spent nearly 7 months on the International Space Station. During that time, he worked closely with American and Canadian astronauts. Valery Tokarev visited space during the heyday of international cooperation. Things have changed since then. Russia is now considering withdrawing from the ISS. It has plans to build its own modular space station, like Mir, the world's first.
Every big country has its own ambitions, but mastering the serious challenges of outer space is very difficult alone. It's difficult in terms of resources, in terms of finances. International cooperation has a positive effect, but that's not mutually exclusive to having a country's own national project.
While more countries and private companies enter the space race, Russia is eyeing alternative partners. The pioneer of orbital stations may be looking to forge a new path, but it will never go it alone. Julia Chapman, CGTN, Moscow.
Keith Kine, what do you make of this? How important is international cooperation on projects of this kind? And do different countries bring different levels of expertise to a project like this?
Yeah, and I remember, I worked on the space station program in the 1990s. When the Russians were brought in, we were all a little worried about things, and we discovered that we learned from each other, whereas the U.S. would have 2 or 3 copies of the same thing in case one fails, the next one would work. The Russians had something called dissimilar redundancy, where they'd have one way of doing it, and if that didn't work, they had a different way of doing it. And we thought that was nuts until we realized that there was some beauty in that, and they also realized that we had some interesting ideas too. That would not have happened had not the 2 programs come together. Now, moving forward, the station, the International Space Station, has been up there for 20 years. And if you watch any television network, you'll notice that the U.S. and Russia are arguing a little bit about things right now.
Right.
Yet, if you look at the International Space Station, with a few small exceptions, that has gone smoothly for 20 years. So I think you got to ask yourself in a bigger sense, why is it that we collaborate and work so well in space? Maybe how we do things on these space projects can teach us a little bit more about how we work together on Earth.
James, that's a great question that Keith posed there. I mean, you worked on NASA's Apollo program, and that was at the height of the Cold War, yet Russia and the United States cooperated on that project.
Yes, I think the key here is that, when I worked on all the Apollo missions, including Apollo 11, and there was a space race, but day-to-day basis, no one was thinking about, are we going to beat the Russians? When Neil Armstrong set his foot on the moon, we all felt national and international pride for the world. And so it wasn't about, beating the Russians. It was about, can human beings get together and land on the moon successfully and explore the moon? In fact, last night, or this morning, Beijing time, I was giving a seminar to several hundred students at China University of Geosciences in Wuhan, and we stopped in the middle to watch the launch. And then we continued on with the lecture and the discussions after that. So it was just so thrilling to share with all these students, the launch of the Chinese astronauts and just have a collective thing. And I was talking about the Yuguang mission, which is, of course, the Chinese mission to Mars. Okay, so yeah, I think that from a bottom up kind of view, science is a real way to also increase the capabilities of international cooperation and peacefulness.
Yan Yuguang, will there be other countries who will get involved with this project, the Chinese space station?
Exactly. You see that from the beginning of China manned space program, we have close cooperation with Russia. Our astronauts were trained in Russia, in Moscow. And also during every flight mission before, we get support from ESA. So they have used their ground stations to help us. So in the future, not only in this space station, we will have joint experiments with other countries. But I've already seen that the foreign astronauts from, for instance, those from Europe, Miss Samantha Christopher Ferretti has been trained in Qingdao in the rescue training. Also China's astronauts, Mr. Ye Guangfu, is trained in Europe. So we can see this as a preliminary preparation for the visit of foreign astronauts taking Shenzhou spaceship. And also, theoretically speaking, the China space station can be accessed by the foreign spacecraft, either a crewed one or a cargo ship. You know that China space station adopts the docking mechanism APAS. So only need a slight change for other countries to adapt this docking mechanism to connect with China's space station. And of course, in the future, technically speaking, it is possible for China to have a module from another country, because China's station will have a secondary core module in the future. It has multiple docking ports and berthing ports. So in the future, if any country can want to do that, we can cooperate and then you use another country's module as a permanent part of this station.
Amitabha Ghosh, you know, Keith Cowing was telling us a moment ago about the experiment that Norway is carrying out carried out on the International Space Station, one of the efforts to combat cancer. What are the other kinds of experiments we will see on these kinds of space stations that are orbiting the Earth?
So I think I was the one who was mentioning the Norway experiment.
Oh, it was you. Sorry.
Right. So I think overall, if you think about it, we all aspire to go to space as astronauts, go to Mars, go to other planets. But the human body is not equipped for this journey, either from a physical standpoint or from a psychological standpoint. So a lot of these experiments deal with perhaps, you know, why does the bone lose so much calcium? Why does the muscle become so weak? How would this translate into if, how can we prevent this from happening if an astronaut was to go to a three-year trip to Mars? And same with the human mind. You know, if you have to live in a can, essentially in space, floating around in space for 2 or 3 years, what does it do to the human mind? We are, after all, very social creatures. So, for example, in the International Space Station, a couple of years back, I think there was an experiment where a device like Alexa would actually sense the mood of the astronaut before replying, so that there is a greater sense of companionship. So I think a lot of the experiments in the space stations tend to try to understand how astronauts can be set up for long-range journeys to another planet.
And of course, there are also questions over gravity in space, right?
Right. So here, you know, on Earth, our human body is actually, that's the biggest difference. Mm-hmm. You're battling gravity every second. Suddenly on the space station, there is no gravity. And so our muscles fall into disuse, our bones fall into disuse. And so how do you prevent them from losing capability, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Keith, we are now seeing the private sector get involved in space as well. I mean, there are companies like SpaceX, Blue Origin as well, and in just a short while, the chief of Amazon, Jeff Bezos, will be going up into space with his brother and someone else who paid an enormous sum of money for an auction, at an auction for a ticket. What is the future of the private sector in space?
Well, the interesting thing about this now is that it used to be that only government employees went into space, and they only went into space on government rockets to government spacecraft. And over time, that has changed to the point that you now have private companies that have capabilities that are often better than the governments have, and the governments are now buying them. But moreover, you have individuals such as Mr. Musk, Mr. Branson, Mr. Bezos, mm-hmm. who have enough money, more than some countries have, and are able to run their own space program. So you have, and then of course these folks grew up in the space age. They read a lot of science fiction, and they don't know any better than to try and do these impossible things. So you bring those things all together, and you have an emergent property, which is whole new ways of thinking of how to do things. You can reuse rockets. You can, many of the things are now modular. The APAS docking system was mentioned earlier. They have an international docking metric now, such that any spacecraft pretty much from Russia, the US, or from China can dock with the other. As a matter of fact, if you were going to ask me whether we're going to see Americans going to the Chinese space station or vice versa, it's a matter of politics, not rocket science. But again, now that the systems are more interchangeable, and I mentioned looking inside of the space station on China, I see things that are very familiar there. I'm pretty much certain that the experiment from Norway would likely be able to be pulled out of the International Space Station and plugged into the Chinese space station, and it would work.
Yan Yuguang, is there a possibility that there could be cooperation between China and the United States on space exploration in the future?
Technically speaking, yes. You know that, as I have already mentioned, we choose an androgynous peripheral attached system, the APAS, as our docking mechanism. And also, I mentioned only a slight change in technology should be done for the spacecraft from US to dock with China's space station, either their Dragon spaceship or the Starliner spaceship. But as our guest has already mentioned, it is a problem of politics, not technology. Technology speaking, everything is okay for Earth. And I hope that in the future we can do this kind of cooperation. It's benefit for the not only US and China, but benefit for the whole world. Especially in the future's moon missions, I think you know that China is planning for its robotic the research station on the lunar surface, cooperation with Russia. But as mentioned by the both governments, this station will open to the whole world. So I also hope that in the future, US can join this project. And moreover, you know that NASA has raised some requirement to China. They hope that the China's data relay satellite, the Magpie Bridge, can prolong its lifespan, because in the future, US also want to have a far-sight mission on the moon. So I hope this kind of proposal can turn into reality.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat, but the conversation continues online. You can join us on CGTN America's Facebook page to comment on this or any other show, or chat with us on Twitter. That's at CGTN America. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.